Welcome to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast, the podcast where I give mechanical engineers like you the tools and motivation to get your professional engineering license and take your career to the next level. In today's episode, we're going to talk about the concept of slow studying, and I got the idea for this episode from a book called Slow Productivity by Cal Newport. Cal is a professor at MIT and an author who spends a lot of his time thinking about and writing about productivity. And one of his most popular books, one of my favorite books by Cal, is called Deep Work. But he recently wrote this book called Slow Productivity. And as I was reading it, I thought, you know what? This is perfect for applying to preparing for the PE exam. And I'm definitely going to borrow some of these ideas. And I just want to upfront give full credit to Cal. He's thought deeply about these concepts, and they really resonate with me. And I think they're important for anyone who's focusing on a big goal or project, and the PE exam certainly fits into that category. So if that's what you're up to, I would encourage you to deeply consider the 3 rules that we're going to lay out in this podcast and try them on for your own purposes and think about your study process, and hopefully they resonate with you as well. And I'm sure that you'll not only get some tremendous results with these ideas, but it'll also be transformative potentially in how you think about work more generally in the future. So just by way of introducing these ideas, Cal has observed, as many of us have also noticed, that we tend to be overwhelmed by work, and a lot of PE candidates have a difficult time recognizing what our priorities are. And as a result of that, we try to work on a lot of different things at the same time and hope to make progress, but a lot of times we're not really sure how we're doing. And we've kind of learned, maybe consciously or unconsciously, from years of doing knowledge work, usually in offices where there's a lot of eyes on us. It's hard to understand how, depending on where you are in your career, if you're in management or if you're earlier on, how do we monitor the performance of employees? How do we expect to be monitored? It can be contentious. It's not obvious how to do that. And we've all kind of figured out how to operate in these environments in a way that allows us to save face. But unfortunately, what that means a lot of times is creating the appearance of being busy, which doesn't feel great. It feels almost disingenuous when what we really want to do is be truly productive. And then as a result of that, when it comes time to actually block out distractions and focus and produce something meaningful, we can actually struggle because we haven't developed that muscle. Instead, we've been focused on developing a different muscle. And it's really icky. It's something a lot of folks don't really like to talk about. It's hard to get out in the open. It's definitely not discussed in the workplace, and it's not likely that that's something that openly comes up in the hierarchical organization in which you work. So the goal of Cal's 3 rules here that we're going to go through, which are adapted from the book, is an attempt to kind of unlock this problem and enable us to actually apply our cognitive effort and transform our time and energy into something of lasting value, which is what we all deeply really want to do anyway. And specifically for PE candidates, what we wish to do is build the knowledge and skills to be able to pass the PE exam, demonstrating technical and professional competence in a specific discipline of engineering, whether that's HVAC and refrigeration, thermal fluid systems, machine design, whatever you're up to. So the first rule is do fewer things. And I'm going to start out each section with a quote directly from Cal. He says, "Strive to reduce your obligations to the point where you can easily imagine accomplishing them with time to spare. Leverage this reduced load to more fully embrace and advance the small number of projects that matter most." Now, your first reaction to reading that might be, well, how am I going to do that? And, how am I going to head off the appearance of seeming lazy? And I know that those objections are going to be there. I think different folks have different levels of autonomy in their work. So you may be more or less able to make the kind of changes that Cal is suggesting here. But let's just pay attention to the real gold in this idea, which is that if we have a smaller number of projects, we'll be able to advance them more effectively. And if they truly are the right priorities, if they're the things that matter most, they're the things that are going to have the most impact. So that's actually good, not just for you and your sanity, but also for your organization. So this is not meant to be a workaround or an underhanded way of trying to just do less. This is actually a way of trying to become more effective yourself in order to have a bigger impact. So just keep that in mind as we continue through here. So Cal understands that it's, quote, crazy at work for most people. And he really wants to invite us to be creative and even a bit radical in how we select and organize our work. So what this means is constraining your workload by giving preference to the projects that will give you autonomy and the ability to be productive, truly productive, as opposed to dealing with a large number of administrative tasks like meetings and emails. Because the administrative burdens can be understated and they can end up having an outsized and adverse impact on how much time and energy is left over for deep work, the important work that we really know we need to do. And an example of this is if you were given a choice to take on a new project, and maybe one of the project is writing a 10-page report about some recent event, or whatever, a 10-page report. Maybe you have to do some research, maybe you have to gather some information. And the other choice is you have to organize a lunch and learn for later in the week. You might say, well, I'm going to take the lunch and learn because that sounds a lot easier and it sounds like it's a lot lower risk, because if I produce this report, now I'm putting a lot of things in writing. People might read that in the future. If I get something wrong, it might come back on me. If I organize a lunch and learn, it's over and done after this week. Even if it doesn't go so well, people will forget it quickly and it doesn't seem like it's that critical, right? But Cal would argue that that's actually a mistake. And the reason for that is the report, you're able to work autonomously. You're doing the research. Maybe you have to reach out to some people with some phone calls or emails, but you're the one pulling the information together. You're the one who's going to organize the outline, who's going to sit down and write it. A lot of that is work that you can do independently. Whereas with the lunch and learn, you're going to have to coordinate who's coming in to give it. You're going to have to organize lunch, right? Which means you're going to have to find out how many people there will be and what they want to eat, if they have any dietary restrictions. You're going to have to coordinate the schedule. So who's attending this thing and when are they available? So you can imagine this is very quickly going to become, I don't want to say an administrative nightmare, but an administrative challenge to say the least. And although nothing's particularly critical, there's going to be a lot of back and forth, and there's going to be changes at the last minute. How do you get people access? And when you look back on this thing a year later, what will have a bigger impact, not just on your career, we don't just want to think selfishly, but also on what's happening for the organization. If this report is going to be useful and it's going to add real value because it has an audience that's going to be able to refer to it down the line, that's a lasting contribution. Whereas, not to say that the lunch and learn won't add value, education is certainly a value add, but in all likelihood, it kind of will come and go and be forgotten. So these are just some ideas for you to consider both perspectives and both sides of the argument, and start to classify the things that you do every day in terms not only of the amount of work that they create for you, but also in terms of the value add. If you were to flash forward to the future and then look back, how important and valuable would that activity have been? And also, what is the administrative overhead? How much of a burden is that, separate and apart from the good stuff, the deep stuff that actually makes a difference? So specifically, if you've decided to pursue your PE and you haven't yet assigned this goal a high priority, you haven't yet decided that this is a critical, important thing that you want to do in your career and that you want to do sometime in the near future, then you could actually be setting yourself up for disappointment, because serious exam prep does not lend itself to sporadic, half-hearted effort the way that dialing into another Zoom call or scanning your email inbox does. Those things are relatively low impact and easy to do. They're not deep work. They're the antithesis of deep work. They make you look busy, but they don't really produce big results. So if you have too many critical projects or high administrative projects on your plate right now, it's fine to defer the exam until you have more bandwidth. I would rather see you do that. Say, you know what? Now is not the right time. I'm busy with a lot of things. I'm going to do the exam later. I'm going to go for my PE in 6 months or next year or at some specific time. It's helpful if you can be specific because you know that you're going to have more bandwidth in the future. But if you don't foresee any reduction in your workload on the horizon, anywhere on the horizon, right? If you just figure things only ever get busier, then that's all the more reason to take on the challenge that Cal is giving us here of trying to figure out how you can free up some capacity. Otherwise, you'll end up deferring your PE indefinitely. And again, if it is a priority, at some point we have to prioritize it. And I've spoken to many engineers that are 15, 20, 25, or even more years into their career who have always kind of had it in the back of their mind, yeah, I'm going to go for my PE someday, but the time was never right. And now they feel like it's too late for them. And that's not true. It's never too late. But it is true that it gets harder because we've been out of school for a greater amount of time, and it's harder to reestablish those study rituals and get back into the books. So that's rule number 1, do fewer things. Rule number 2 is study at a natural pace. From Cal, it was work at a natural pace, but I took the liberty of adapting it for our purposes. Study at a natural pace. And Cal's quote is, allow your work to unfold along a sustainable timeline with variations in intensity in settings conducive to brilliance. And this point about allowing our work to unfold in a sustainable way, in a natural way, usually a slower way than most of the other things that we're doing, made me think about an old Navy SEAL motto that my triathlon coach used to repeat, which is slow is smooth, smooth is fast. Now, some of you may have heard this before, but this is a counterintuitive idea that at first doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. Obviously, the goal of a race is to finish as fast as possible. But what my coach was trying to say is that by slowing down when we're training, that enables us to move through the water or through the pedal stroke or through our running stride more efficiently. And by learning to improve these movements, speed naturally emerges. So instead of focusing on going as fast as possible, just frantically expending energy like a sprinter, he wanted us to set our focus on being smooth. So that becomes the guidepost, that becomes the North Star every day that you come to train. You're not focusing on going as fast as possible. You're focused on being as smooth as possible. And you trust that speed is something that happens automatically while working on technique. So you focus on your technique, and the speed is just going to take care of itself. You have to believe that. And I can prove this just by a simple thought experiment too. So imagine I handed you a Rubik's Cube and I challenged you to solve it as fast as possible. And if you know how to solve the Rubik's Cube, then imagine that I had done this when you had no previous experience. Would you immediately start moving the pieces around, making as many twists as possible in the hopes of randomly stumbling upon a solved position? Of course not. You know that there are some skills and algorithms and tips and tricks that you probably need to learn first. Maybe you can start solving it using just intuition and spatial reasoning, but then pretty soon, any progress that you make to correctly fill in parts of the cube that you haven't done yet are probably going to disrupt the earlier parts that you already had where you wanted them, and you start to realize, there's more to this thing. I'm not going to just wildly move the pieces around. I've got to kind of have a plan here and think about it. So the thing we want to recognize here is that even the fastest solvers on the planet once had to learn how to do it the first time, or the first 100 times if we're being honest, because it's hard. So they only started perfecting their craft by speeding up their movements incrementally over many repetitions after they had done it slowly and figured out those algorithms and those building blocks, those key movements that they could build up upon. They spent a lot of time doing that at the beginning, and then they added speed later. So the key in both of these examples is that we should only begin adding speed once we've achieved a base level of knowledge and skills related to any particular topic. So bringing it back to the PE exam, pretty often I work with candidates who insist from the very beginning of their study process on solving problems against the clock, limiting themselves to 6 minutes per problem because they know that's how much time you'll have on average during the exam, right? They've done the math. They say it's 8 hours. I divide that by 80 problems. I've got to do 10 problems an hour. I only have 6 minutes per problem. But this is foolish, and it's rooted in unrealistic expectations. And it's obvious why it happens. It really stems from rule 1, do fewer things, which is being ignored. They're doing too many things, so they're already stressed and overly busy, too busy to really slow down and do the work properly. So candidates will find themselves constrained on time, but they're stubborn, which can be a virtue because it keeps us coming back, and stubbornness can be a part of persistence. So that's great. But sometimes when we have this forceful commitment to making progress no matter what, right? I've got to show up and study. I've got to do 10 problems an hour. Their intensity remains pegged at such a high level as they scramble to try to hit the targets, and doing this before having actually demonstrated the ability to solve a particular type of problem at all. It just doesn't make any sense. We've got to slow down and do it right once the first time, and then try to add speed later. Or as Cal so eloquently put it, by definition, learning is a cognitive endeavor which works best when you get into a natural groove. The grand achievement is built on the steady accumulation of modest results over time. And he adds, the path is long, pace yourself. I don't think I could say it any better than that. And the third rule is obsess over quality. Cal says, quality demands that you slow down. So really a natural extension there of rule 2. And this is one that pretty quickly gets an objection from many of us. And I can understand why. The reason we're uncomfortable with slowing down is because we're already so busy, and we feel as though if we were to slow down and expand the amount of time it takes to do something unnecessarily, that we're wasting time. And practically, this could mean during your exam that you're foregoing the opportunity to bank time to work on other more challenging problems. Or even before that, just while you're studying, it could mean fitting less problems into a given study session, or simply not covering as much material as possible for that day, week, or month. So if you're thinking about your studying as a whole, and you know you've got 300 or 400 or 500 problems that you want to do, and you're not making progress on them as fast as possible, then you have to expand the schedule to fit the amount of problems that you have. And there's a part of us that just wants to do the exact opposite, which is compress the schedule and go faster. But by now, we should be clear that the focus required to get better is simply not compatible with busyness. That busy energy, that frantic energy that we can get away with when we're just checking our inbox, scanning through, making a few quick replies, managing our calendar, calling into a Zoom call, and maybe not saying a whole lot on it, kind of being checked out. You can get away with those things a little bit when it's strictly of an administrative nature and you're not really having to think deeply and do hard work. But when it comes to studying, there's nowhere to hide. You will be exposed by the exam if you haven't done the work in the right way. So our goal to revise that and recognize that deep work is not compatible with busyness, we should be trying to tackle a little quality work every day, which will produce more meaningful and satisfying results over time. And this requires patience and faith in the process. And I know that feels like a bit of a leap, but I think as you're hearing me talk through this and you're thinking about your own situation, your own life, and when you've gotten good results with studying and when maybe it hasn't gone so well, you know that this is true. And it also helps if you have study resources that you trust, that you know are organized and sequenced to bring you to a passing result. That's the reason why my programs exist. But also, aside from the resources you're using, the process can actually become more fun. And we've talked about this in a previous podcast as well. When you approach it with this commitment to quality, almost an obsession, because you bring more creativity and you find yourself generating your own questions as you're going through the problems, and to some degree, almost getting lost in your head along the way, which can seem dangerous. That seems like a place where you could waste a lot of time, but it's not a waste. You have to allow yourself to pursue different paths and get a little bit lost with the belief that you can find the answers. And you often do. And that is an extremely satisfying and effective way to study. This is the way. The only caution that I would give here, just to counterbalance that, is that we want to temper the quote-unquote obsession, right? Obsession is a strong word, over quality before it starts to resemble perfectionism, because we can go a little bit too far in that direction. So while we do want to honor Cal's overall point here and give ourselves the space and time that we need, we want to allow enough time to build something great, but not unlimited time. There is such a thing as good enough, which to me would mean passing the exam with confidence. But you don't need to become a master. We're looking for progress over perfection. So to summarize, My claim here is that slow studying, just like Cal's slow productivity, paradoxically can enable you to become a professional engineer faster and with more certainty than you otherwise would. And Cal has blazed a path for us to follow, specifically by following his 3 rules. 1, do fewer things. 2, study at a natural pace. And 3, obsess over quality. So if you follow these rules, I strongly believe that your study journey will be rich, satisfying, and efficient. And this article only scratches the surface of the valuable ideas that are in the book, Slow Productivity. So if you're interested in checking that out, I would definitely suggest it. There's a lot of inspiring stories in there that kind of add more than this really rough synopsis that I've just given. And he also adds a lot of specific tactics that I didn't really have a chance to get into in this episode. So if you found this podcast helpful, I'd be honored to support you on your journey toward professional licensure. If you want to learn more about the Full Access Bundle or any of our other courses or programs, shoot me an email, dan@mechanicalpeexamprep.com. Until next time, happy studying. Thanks for listening to the Mechanical PE Exam Prep Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review to help other engineers find the podcast. And if you're looking for a program that will help you pass the PE exam, check out the Full Access Bundle available at mechanicalpeexamprep.com, and feel free to reach out with any questions. I would be honored to be your guide on the journey to becoming a professional engineer.